Welcome to Conspiracist. Today we are embarking on a deep dive into a hypothesis that, well, it's really captured public imagination and sparked some pretty intense debate across scientific, economic, and political spheres. We're talking about the persistent idea that governments have intentionally concealed evidence of what are often called forbidden energy theories.
Right, and this isn't just about, technical inventions in a lab somewhere.
No, it's much bigger than that.
Exactly. It's about a deeply held belief system, really,
Yeah.
that challenges established paradigms and often reflect these broader societal anxieties we see.
That's a great way to put it. So our mission today is to meticulously unpack the various facets of this, well, let's call it an intriguing hypothesis, as it's presented in popular discourse and historical accounts.
That's right. We'll trace its origins, try to understand where these ideas first came from.
And explore the compelling reasons why its supposed suppression resonates so strongly with some people. Why does this idea stick?
And we'll look at its historical impact, too, both on scientific efforts and maybe on public trust as well.
We should also follow how these ideas have sort of morphed over time alongside technological progress.
Definitely. And finally, assess their practical relevance, or maybe the lack thereof, in our current global energy situation.
So the goal is really to provide you, the listener, with a comprehensive understanding of this complex narrative. We want to try and separate the scientific fact from the speculation where we can.
And explore the motivations, what actually fuels these beliefs. It's quite a tangled web.
It really is. Okay, let's begin by maybe trying to clearly define the central terms here: forbidden energy and free energy. They often get used interchangeably, don't they?
They do. And understanding the specific connotations within this hypothesis is pretty crucial.
So what exactly do proponents mean when they talk about these concepts?
Okay, so at its core, free energy, in this context, usually refers to some kind of theoretical power source that would ideally need very little or maybe even no input to generate a significant usable amount of electricity.
Like getting something for nothing almost.
That's the implication. And it kind of branches into two main ideas. First, you hear about overunity devices.
Overunity, meaning?
Meaning machines that are claimed to produce more energy output than the energy input they actually receive, which, right away raises red flags from a physics perspective.
Because that breaks fundamental laws, right?
Exactly. The laws of thermodynamics, specifically. We'll get into that. The second idea involves ambient energy devices.
Ambient energy, like pulling energy out of the air.
Sort of. The idea is they're supposedly capable of extracting energy from the surrounding environment. Sources like the Earth's natural magnetic field or atmospheric electricity, or even what some describe as a universal background energy field.
Okay, so the promise here is energy that's basically limitless and costs nothing to run once you have the device.
That's the dream. That's the core promise that makes it so appealing.
And the forbidden part, that's where the conspiracy angle really kicks in, suggesting it's being actively hidden.
Precisely. The forbidden label isn't just saying, oh, this is unproven tech. It implies a deliberate, conscious, intentional concealment.
Or active suppression.
Yes, active suppression of these supposedly technologically viable, pollution-free, essentially no-cost energy sources.
And who are the alleged suppressors in these theories?
Well, it varies, but typically it's powerful governments, huge multinational corporations, especially energy companies, or sometimes influential advocacy groups.
The ones with a vested interest in keeping things as they are.
Exactly. According to the theory, they all benefit from the current energy system and want to prevent the widespread adoption of anything truly revolutionary that would disrupt it.
And sometimes you hear about really out there sources like quantum vacuum energy.
Right. Some proponents suggest these hidden technologies could tap into truly novel sources, like the quantum vacuum or what gets popularly called zero-point energy. They often see this as this infinite reservoir of power just waiting to be harnessed.
And historically, people use different terms like perpetual motion.
Yeah, historically, variations of these ideas use terms like perpetual motion or overunity, hinting at devices that could just run indefinitely without any external fuel source.
Now, you mentioned zero-point energy, and that is actually a concept in mainstream physics, isn't it? But there's a big gap between the science and the popular idea.
A huge gap, and it's really crucial to differentiate. In quantum field theory, zero-point energy refers to the lowest possible energy state of a quantum mechanical system. It's a kind of residual energy that persists even at absolute zero temperature.
So it's real, theoretically.
Oh yes, it's a real theoretical concept. It describes the energy density stored in quantum fields even when there are no particles present. However, And this is the key point. Current scientific understanding, governed by fundamental physical laws, indicates that extracting a relevant, usable amount of energy from it for practical work is considered highly unlikely, maybe even impossible for our technology.
And that's not just an engineering problem, it's more fundamental.
It seems to be. It touches upon things like the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, which basically implies we can't simultaneously know both the precise energy and time of a quantum fluctuation. That makes controlled extraction extraordinarily difficult, maybe impossible.
Whereas the popular notion kind of glosses over that complexity.
Completely. The popular notion often misrepresents this complex scientific concept as just this vast, easily accessible energy reserve, ready for someone to invent a simple device to tap into it. It's a fundamental misunderstanding of the physics involved.
Okay, so if we trace this whole hypothesis back, this idea of endless energy, where do we first see this, this human pursuit of what we're calling forbidden energy?
Well, the fascination with perpetual motion machines is remarkably old. It goes back at least to the Middle Ages.
Really? That far back?
Absolutely. And for centuries, the question of whether such devices were even possible was a genuine scientific and philosophical puzzle. People didn't have the understanding of thermodynamics we have now.
So what did some of these early attempts look like?
Some were incredibly ingenious, even if they were fundamentally flawed. Take the 16th century self-blowing windmill. It was proposed by Mark Anthony Zamora, an Italian philosopher.
A self-blowing windmill, how would that work?
Well, his design suggested a windmill that would power bellows,
Okay.
which in turn would blow air onto the windmill's own sails, creating this supposed self-sustaining cycle.
Ah, I see the flaw there. You lose energy in the process.
Exactly. Or consider Cornelius Drebbel's 17th century machine. It was said to keep time and indicate weather changes, supposedly powered just by variations in atmospheric pressure and temperature.
Interesting idea, but again, likely not truly perpetual.
Right. And Johann Bernoulli, the brilliant Swiss mathematician, he even conceptualized a fluid energy machine in the early 18th century. There was also Georg Andreas Buchler, a German engineer who designed self-operating water mills in 1686. He tried to create a closed-loop water system that would just continuously turn a wheel without any external input.
So these early designs, they failed, but they show this deep-seated desire, right, to overcome energy limits.
Absolutely, a persistent human dream.
And there's one particularly famous or maybe infamous figure from that era, Johann Bessler, also known as Orpheus. Early 18th century, his claims were pretty wild, weren't they?
Bessler, yes. Orpheus is definitely one of the most compelling and controversial figures in this whole history. He claimed to have tinkered with over 300 models before finally developing what he presented as actual working versions of a self-moving wheel.
What did he actually show people?
Well, in 1712, he demonstrated a wheel that, once you set it in motion, supposedly kept spinning for long periods, sometimes weeks, apparently, without any visible external power source.
Weeks. How did people react?
His demonstrations were often very controlled, highly theatrical, and he demanded enormous sums of money for the secret behind it. Some prominent people, like the famous philosopher Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, actually vouched for him, at least initially.
Leibniz did? Wow.
Yeah, though it's unclear how closely they actually got to examine the machine itself. Bessler was very protective. Despite the buzz and the initial endorsements, he ultimately refused to fully reveal his method. He always claimed he was afraid his invention would be stolen.
And after he died?
The machines were never successfully replicated based on what was known, and many suspected, then and now, that there was some kind of cleverly hidden mechanism involved, maybe clockwork, maybe something else. His story really captures the allure, the mystery, and ultimately the disappointment that often surrounds these free energy claims.
Okay, let's move forward a bit. The 19th century saw new scientific understanding, especially around electricity and magnetism. John Ernst Worrell Keely is a key figure then, right? Often cited by proponents.
Yes, Keely. He definitely brought a new layer of complexity, moving beyond just mechanical contraptions to what he called etheric technology.
Etheric technology, based on the old idea of the luminiferous ether.
Precisely. In the late 19th century, he captivated audiences and, importantly, investors with demonstrations of his induction resonance motion motor. He claimed it harnessed this mysterious universal etheric force, using something he called sympathetic vibratory physics.
Sounds very esoteric.
It was. His demonstrations were elaborate, big, intricate machines that seemed to run on absolutely no discernible fuel source. He managed to attract considerable funding from wealthy patrons, including people like Clara Jessup Moore.
But like Bessler, he was secretive.
Intensely secretive about his methods. And after Keeley died in 1898, the Philadelphia Inquirer newspaper investigated his laboratory.
What did they find?
They dug things up. They found complex systems of hidden tubes, likely for compressed air, and false floors. It strongly suggested his impressive demonstrations were just elaborate hoaxes, powered secretly.
So, another case of alleged fraud.
It became a pretty seminal example, yeah, highlighting how easily public fascination with these ideas could be exploited for financial gain.
And even moving into more recent history, the late 20th century, we still see people making these kinds of claims, like Joseph Wesley Newman, still bumping up against those same fundamental laws.
Exactly. Joseph Newman is another notable case. In 1979, he applied for a U.S. patent for a DC electrical motor. His claim was bold. It supposedly produced more mechanical work output than the electrical power supply to it, essentially an overunity device.
What did the patent office say?
They rejected his application in 1983. Their reasoning was pretty straightforward. His device appeared to violate the first law of thermodynamics conservation of energy.
Did he accept that?
Not at all. Newman fought the decision vigorously. It went to court, and eventually a U.S. district court ordered independent tests of his device.
And the results?
The tests were conclusive. They found his motor did not produce excess power. In fact, its efficiency was pretty typical for that kind of motor. No overunity characteristics were found whatsoever.
But he still maintained his claims.
Oh, yes. Despite the clear scientific refutations and legal rulings, Newman insisted for decades that the scientific establishment was suppressing his invention. It's a common refrain, this appeal to suppression, when the science doesn't support the claim.
So these historical claims, from Bessler through Keeley to Newman, they consistently seem to ignore or fail to account for real-world losses like friction and resistance.
That's the crux of it. They fail to account for these fundamental losses, the inefficiencies that are just inherent in any real physical system, as described by the laws of thermodynamics. It's the scientific reality that these claims consistently run up against.
Which brings us, inevitably, to Nikola Tesla, a name synonymous with genius and innovation, but also, in many popular narratives, tangled up with these claims of hidden or suppressed free energy. What's the real story with his work in this context?
Tesla. Yes, his actual scientific and engineering work was undeniably brilliant, especially with alternating current, no question about that.
But the free energy connection.
In popular narratives, his name has become almost inextricably linked to free energy. Often, people point to his research on wireless power transmission as the key piece of suppressed technology.
The idea being he found a way to pull energy from the air or transmit it freely everywhere.
Exactly. The idea is that Tesla had discovered a way to harvest energy directly from the atmosphere, or maybe Earth's harmonics, or transmit it wirelessly, universally, for free. His actual work, though, like the experiments at Wardenclyffe Tower, focused on high-frequency energy transmission.
And how efficient was that, really?
Well, he aimed for maybe 80% efficiency under ideal conditions, which is impressive, but not perfect. And it had significant practical limitations for widespread power delivery.
Such as?
For one, the system suffered from limited range because of the inverse square law.
Meaning the power drops off fast with distance.
Dramatically. Like a flashlight beam spreading out and getting dimmer the further away you are. Power density decreases rapidly. Plus, his system generated a lot of wideband electrical interference, which would have caused chaos with other emerging technologies, like radio.
So the popular narrative that his inventions were just too good, or that he cared more about people than profit, and that's why they were suppressed by powerful economic interests, that's central to this hypothesis, isn't it?
It absolutely is. That narrative is key. The argument goes, if electricity could be beamed wirelessly everywhere, traditional power companies couldn't easily meter it or charge for it.
So they'd lose their business model.
Right. Which gives them, in this theory, a powerful motive for suppression. It taps into a deep-seated distrust of corporate power and greed.
But the technical reality of wireless power on that scale.
Yes, where the narrative hits a wall. While wireless power transmission is technically feasible for very low-power things, think RFID tags, charging your phone wirelessly on a pad, maybe an induction cooktop.
Small-scale stuff.
Yes, but scaling that up for widespread high-power transmission, like powering cities or industries, it becomes extremely inefficient. The energy losses due to the inverse square law and other factors will be enormous, just hugely wasteful.
And potentially dangerous, too.
Potentially very dangerous. The powerful transmitters needed for that kind of high-voltage transmission over distance could pose significant safety risks to people, animals, the environment. So the idea that this was a practical, viable, suppressed alternative to our wired grid, well, it's largely unsupported by the known physics and engineering realities.
Okay. Beyond the mechanical devices and these interpretations of Tesla's work, another major flashpoint often brought up in forbidden energy discussions is the cold fusion phenomenon from the late 80s. Can you walk us through that? It was a huge story at the time.
Oh, enormous. Cold fusion absolutely exploded onto the scientific scene in March 1989. Two respected electrochemists, Stanley Pons at the University of Utah and Martin Fleischmann from the University of Southampton.
Reputable scientists.
Yes, which added to the initial credibility. They announced at a press conference, which was unusual, normally you go through peer review first, that they had observed excess heat during an electrochemical experiment.
What was the experiment?
It involved palladium electrodes immersed in heavy water, which contained deuterium, an isotope of hydrogen. They claimed this excess heat that couldn't be explained by known chemical reactions, was due to a nuclear fusion reaction happening at room temperature, hence cold fusion.
Wow. The implications of that would be staggering.
Absolutely staggering. It generated this immense, unprecedented global excitement. People immediately grasped the potential. A clean, reliable, virtually abundant energy source, maybe derived just from seawater. Imagine power plants running on basically water, producing no harmful waste, no greenhouse gases. It sounded like the ultimate energy solution.
So what happened next? Did labs everywhere jump on this?
Immediately, there was this rapid flurry of intense activity. Research labs all over the world dropped what they were doing to try and replicate the Pons and Fleischmann experiment. They were driven by both the incredible potential and, frankly, the need for scientific validation or refutation.
And could they replicate it?
Well, that's where the problem started. These initial attempts, often working with pretty limited details from the initial announcements, largely failed to consistently reproduce that claimed excess heat.
Inconsistencies started showing up.
Yes. And as more rigorous scientific scrutiny was applied, people started identifying significant methodological flaws and potential experimental errors in the original Pons and Fleischmann work.
No kind of flaws.
Things related to calorimetry, how they were measuring the heat potential, unaccounted for chemical energy sources, issues with calibration. But crucially, there was also this striking and consistent lack of the expected nuclear reaction byproducts.
Like what? What should they have seen if it was real fusion?
Well, traditional fusion, even theoretical cold fusion, should produce measurable levels of neutrons, or tritium, another hydrogen isotope, or gamma rays. Pons and Fleischmann reported minimal or no such byproducts, certainly not at levels consistent with the amount of energy they claimed to be producing.
That's a major discrepancy.
It was a huge red flag. For instance, if their reported power output was really due to conventional deuterium fusion, the neutron flux generated would have been instantly lethal to anyone in the room. Clearly, that wasn't happening.
So what was the final verdict from the scientific community? How did cold fusion end up being viewed?
By late 1989, just months after that initial frenzy, the overwhelming majority of mainstream scientists had concluded that the cold fusion claims were unsubstantiated and critically irreproducible.
So it faded quickly.
It rapidly gained this reputation as an example of pathological science. That's a term physicist Irving Langmuir coined decades earlier for research that sort of clings to a belief despite failing rigorous scrutiny. It's often cited now in science ethics courses as a cautionary tale.
A cautionary tale about what?
About making extraordinary claims without extraordinary reproducible proof, and maybe about the dangers of science by press conference before peer review. The U.S. Department of Energy, the DOE, actually conducted two major reviews of cold fusion research.
When were those?
One in 1989, right in the thick of it, and another later in 2004. Both reviews reached the same conclusion. The reported results did not present convincing evidence of a useful energy source or a verifiable nuclear reaction.
And they didn't fund it.
Consequently, they declined to allocate specific federal funding for dedicated cold fusion research programs. Today, you rarely see articles claiming cold fusion published in mainstream, peer-reviewed scientific journals. And when they do appear, they attract intense, usually very skeptical, scrutiny, precisely because those initial claims were so thoroughly examined and found wanting by the broader community.
Okay, we've laid a good foundation now. What forbidden energy means, its history, some key examples like Tesla and cold fusion. Let's shift gears a bit and focus on the significance of this hypothesis. Why does this idea of suppressed energy resonate so deeply? Why does it matter beyond just the scientific arguments?
Well, I think at its heart, the hypothesis of suppressed forbidden energy theories taps into a very powerful hope. Proponents see it as a perceived, almost magical solution to humanity's biggest global energy challenges.
And those challenges are undeniable.
Absolutely undeniable. Look at the current landscape. We are grappling with a serious escalating energy crisis. We've got a rapidly growing global population, ever-increasing demand for power.
And our main sources, fossil fuels, have major downsides.
Right. Oil, coal, natural gas, they face huge long-term drawbacks. Their impact on climate change is paramount, obviously. They're finite resources, and their extraction and distribution are often tangled up with geopolitical instability.
Even renewables like solar and wind, while promising, aren't a perfect fix yet, are they?
No, they're crucial, but they face challenges. Intermittency is a big one. The sun doesn't always shine, the wind doesn't always blow. That means we need extensive energy storage, which is expensive. They also require significant land area, complex grid upgrades. It's not simple.
And forbidden energy is presented as the clean sweep solution to all of that, the silver bullet.
Exactly. It's presented as the perfect antidote. Clean, reliable, virtually limitless. A technology that could, in theory, just completely revolutionize the world as we know it.
Proponents literally talk about electricity too cheap to meter, right?
That's the phrase you often hear. The idea is it would make energy a near-zero-cost commodity. And if that happened, they argue, it would usher in this unprecedented age of abundance.
Solving everything from climate change to poverty.
That's the vision. Fundamentally reshaping society by addressing critical global issues like climate change, eliminating energy poverty, vastly improving quality of life for billions. The psychological pull of such a simple, elegant, universal solution to incredible complex problems. It's undeniably powerful. It offers hope, a clear path, even if it's scientifically dubious.
And beyond those potential benefits, the economic and political implications, if this were real, they'd be absolutely world-shattering, a massive disruption.
Oh, completely cataclysmic. The advent of genuinely free, or nearly free, energy would trigger an economic earthquake.
Sure.
Think about it. Demand for fossil fuels, oil, gas, coal would plummet, potentially vanishing almost overnight.
And traditional power generation, utilities.
Fundamentally restructured, if not made obsolete. Yeah. This poses an existential threat to incredibly powerful, established industries. We're talking about industries that represent trillions of dollars in global markets.
So the theory goes, these industries would fight back hard.
That's central to the suppression hypothesis. The fossil fuel industry in particular is often depicted as this monolithic force fighting tooth and nail to protect its immense financial interests, actively undermining clean energy progress through lobbying, misinformation, you name it.
You hear allegations about dark money funding climate denial and things like that.
Frequently, allegations arise of dark money from these interests, funding vast misinformation campaigns about legitimate clean energy, promoting climate change denial, supporting deregulation efforts, all, supposedly, to maintain the profitability of their existing infrastructure and market share. The argument is simple. They have every possible incentive to suppress any technology that threatens their core business.
And it's not just private industry, right? Governments, traditional power companies, they'd also face huge challenges to their revenue and control.
Absolutely. If energy were truly free or virtually free, governments would lose massive revenue streams from energy taxes, distribution fees, infrastructure maintenance charges. Power companies would lose their primary revenue model.
It represents a profound loss of control over a vital commodity.
Exactly. Energy underpins almost every aspect of modern society. From this perspective, some argue that government intervention would be more costly, and the theory of free would be abused for political enticements and votes. The idea being that political entities might find it impossible to manage a resource they couldn't control or monetize, potentially leading to social chaos, or at least a radical, unpredictable restructuring of global economies.
I can definitely see how that kind of shift would redraw the geopolitical map, too. The balance of global power would change dramatically.
Undeniably. Imagine a world no longer dependent on oil and natural gas. The geopolitical significance of energy-rich regions, particularly the Middle East, would diminish significantly.
It would totally reshape foreign policy.
It would reduce the significance of the Middle East as a political national interest, potentially leading to major military, foreign policy, and fiscal implications. It could even, some argue, curb expansionist imperialist forces fueled by oil, because the strategic need to secure foreign energy supplies would evaporate.
And some proponents take it even further, seeing it almost as an ideological challenge.
Yes, some view free energy as a revolutionary force, even a fundamental threat to capitalism itself. They express this hope that its emergence would signify the end of capitalism and the beginning of an entirely new economic and social order, this age of abundance, where scarcity is eliminated and maybe global cooperation replaces economic competition. It's a utopian vision, really.
Which brings us back to the science and perhaps the biggest hurdle. These claims fundamentally challenge established scientific laws. For most scientists, the rejection isn't about conspiracy, it's about basic physics, right?
That is absolutely correct, and it's the central point of conflict between mainstream science and these free energy ideas. The most significant obstacle for almost all these claims is their direct conflict with the first and second laws of thermodynamics. These aren't just theories. They're foundational pillars of modern physics, tested and verified countless times.
Can you quickly recap those laws for us?
Sure. The first law is often called the law of conservation of energy. It states, very simply, that energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only be converted from one form to another.
So, an overunity device, producing more energy out than in.
Directly violates this fundamental principle. It's not just about inefficiency. It's claiming the creation of energy from nothing, which, according to everything we know, is impossible.
And the second law, that's about entropy, right? The tendency towards disorder.
Yes. The second law is a bit more complex, but it implies that in any real-world energy conversion process, some energy will always be dissipated, usually as unusable heat. It basically says you can't even break even in a real process. You always lose some useful energy. It makes 100% efficient systems impossible in the real world, let alone systems that produce more energy than they consume.
So a machine running forever or producing extra energy would have to defy these inherent losses.
It would. But proponents of forbidden energy often counter this by arguing that mainstream science is just inherently resistant to truly revolutionary ideas. They say science is trapped by its own dogma.
And they point to historical examples.
Frequently, they cite cases where ideas now widely accepted were initially met with skepticism or ridicule, like the atomic theory of matter debated for centuries, the Big Bang theory initially derided, symbiogenesis, the idea that complex cells evolved from simpler organisms living together, faced strong resistance for decades.
Even continental drift.
Right. Relatively intuitive, but dismissed as pseudoscience for half a century until plate tectonics provided the mechanism. They use these examples to suggest that today's rejection of free energy is just history repeating itself.
So the argument becomes, the scientific establishment is entrenched, maybe deliberately ignoring discoveries that challenge their understanding, creating this hive mentality or dogmatic control that stifles real breakthroughs.
That's exactly the framing they often use. They suggest the resistance isn't based on the scientific invalidity of the claims, but rather on institutional inertia, protecting established paradigms, or even that deliberate cover-up to protect vested interests we talked about.
It highlights a real tension, doesn't it? Science needs rigor and skepticism, but history shows sometimes established views are overturned.
It does. But the core of the scientific method remains testability, reproducibility, and evidence that fits within or forces a revision of established physical laws. For many believers in suppression, however, the lack of widespread acceptance isn't seen as scientific failure, but rather as proof of the conspiracy itself. It becomes a self-sealing argument.
Let's shift now to the real-world impacts of this whole hypothesis, especially, unfortunately, how it can lead to the promotion of fraud and pseudoscience.
Regrettably, yes. The enduring allure, this powerful dream of free energy, has absolutely created fertile ground, a haven for investment fraud and pseudoscience, as some have called it.
We mentioned Keeley earlier.
And there's a long history. Back in 1812, a guy named Charles Redheffer presented a supposed perpetual motion machine in New York, claimed limitless power. Well, an engineer, Robert Fulton, famous for the steamboat, exposed it as a hoax. He figured out the machine's gears were actually being driven by a hidden crank, operated by an old man hidden away in another room. Seriously, reports say the outraged spectators actually destroyed the machine when they realized they'd been duped.
And in the modern era, with the internet.
Oh, it's exploded. Videos claiming to demonstrate free energy devices are all over platforms like YouTube. But when independent researchers or engineers actually scrutinize them, they're almost universally found to be unworkable.
What tricks do they use?
Hidden components, like concealed batteries powering the device. Undisclosed external energy sources, like hidden wires or induction coils. Or sometimes just clever video editing to create the illusion of continuous motion or excess power.
It's disheartening that even after these things get debunked, some enthusiasts just keep believing, right? They often seem to fall prey to scammers who have ready excuses.
It is a persistent and really unfortunate pattern. The scammers are often very adept at shifting blame. They might tell the user they assembled the kit wrong, or that atmospheric conditions weren't right, or they invoke these vague notions of suppression, the Illuminati jammed your device, to explain why it doesn't actually work as promised.
You also mentioned HHO generators, or Brown's gas, for cars. That's another modern example.
Yes, claims related to HHO generators, devices that use electrolysis to split water into hydrogen and oxygen, supposedly to boost car fuel efficiency significantly, are a common modern iteration.
Do they work?
Scientifically, no, not in the way claimed. While they do produce a highly flammable mixture of hydrogen and oxygen, which is dangerous in itself, they've been rigorously debunked by scientists and engineers multiple times.
Why don't they work?
The fundamental flaw is, again, thermodynamics. The energy you have to put in to split the water via electrolysis is always greater than the energy you get out when you burn the resulting hydrogen and oxygen. You lose energy in the conversion. It's a net energy loss, not a gain.
So it can't improve overall efficiency.
Correct. It violates the first law. Yet, despite clear scientific refutation, people continue to market and believe in these devices, often blaming oil companies or government conspiracies for their lack of mainstream adoption. It sadly shows how pseudoscience can really take root and persist, even against overwhelming evidence.
And beyond these specific cases of fraud, there's a broader, maybe more insidious impact this has on public discourse and just the general credibility of a legitimate science, isn't there?
There is, and it's a profoundly significant and often damaging impact. Conspiracy theories in general, including this free energy suppression narrative, are often used as a powerful rhetorical device. They appeal directly to the emotions of a significant segment of the public, even when the claims themselves are objectively implausible.
How do they do that?
They often feed into and amplify a pervasive distrust of the establishment, whether that's government, academia, corporations, or mainstream science. They encourage people to question everything these institutions say or do.
And they demand simple answers to complex problems.
Often, yes. Proponents of these theories might demand immediate, comprehensive answers to incredibly complex scientific or technical questions. And when those simple, digestible answers aren't immediately forthcoming because reality is often complicated, the perceived failure to deliver is then twisted and presented as proof of conspiratorial deception. It creates this kind of no-win situation for reasoned explanation.
It sounds like you can quickly spiral into demanding equal time for completely fringe views, even when there's a solid scientific consensus.
Yes, that advocacy meme of demanding equal time can be particularly problematic. While questioning assumptions is healthy in science itself, in public discourse, giving undue weight to scientifically baseless claims can be really misleading.
Where's the real danger there?
The danger emerges when these kinds of theories gain enough traction to actually dominate the public debate, or when they're deliberately weaponized, perhaps by actors with vested interests, to discredit scientific evidence in a public forum.
With potentially serious consequences.
Potentially tragic consequences, yes. Think about undermining trust in climate science or public health measures. A common tactic used by conspiracists is to seize on any perceived flaw or gap in its evidence, even minor ones, to try and prove a scientific theory wrong entirely.
But science doesn't really work like that, does it? Theories evolve.
Exactly. Scientific theories are inherently provisional. They evolve through continuous refinement, testing, and incorporating new evidence. They aren't usually overthrown by a single anomaly. This tactic creates a false equivalence between well-tested, robust theories and completely unsubstantiated claims.
I've also noticed how these ideas sometimes filter into popular culture, movies, TV shows. How does that shape public perception?
That's a really interesting aspect. Free energy and cold fusion have definitely permeated popular culture. Sometimes it's just a quick joke or reference, like in shows like Murphy Brown or The Simpsons, which shows a sort of baseline public awareness, even if it's superficial.
But sometimes it's more central.
Yes, they've been used as significant plot devices in films, like the movie The Saint, where the whole plot revolved around acquiring a secret cold fusion formula. This kind of representation, even if it's pure fiction, can subtly push these concepts into the realm of perceived possibility in the public mind. It makes them seem less outlandish.
And there's that recurring trope of the lone genius fighting the system.
Right. The forbidden science meme itself is a powerful narrative archetype. It often features this courageous, independent scientist resisting orthodoxy, battling against a closed-minded scientific establishment or a repressive government. This narrative gets invoked constantly, often drawing parallels to historical figures like Galileo.
Even if the comparison isn't really accurate.
Often, yes. Galileo challenged prevailing views based on observation and mathematical reasoning within the framework of physics. Many free energy claims fundamentally violate the known framework of physics without providing the necessary extraordinary evidence. But the romantic narrative of the lone rebel scientist is very appealing.
And the internet, social media, that must be a massive amplifier for all this.
Huge. The proliferation of these ideas is massively facilitated by online communities and social networks. These platforms, sometimes inadvertently, create powerful echo chambers.
Where you only hear views you already agree with.
Pretty much. Individuals get primarily exposed to information that confirms their existing beliefs, which reinforces them strongly. This environment fosters a kind of groupthink mentality.
Making believers feel validated.
Exactly. They feel validated, understood, maybe even part of an exclusive in-group that possesses secret knowledge or a higher truth. Meanwhile, those who adhere to mainstream science are often dismissed as naive, brainwashed, or even part of the establishment cover-up.
And that reinforces mistrust of authority.
Deeply. It contributes significantly to identity protection. For believers, questioning the belief becomes questioning their identity. And it reinforces this deep-seated mistrust in authority figures and institutions, which makes it incredibly difficult for evidence-based arguments or corrections to actually penetrate those communities.
Thinking about the evolution of these ideas over time, it seems like the types of forbidden energy claims have shifted as science itself has progressed. It started very mechanical, right?
Absolutely. The evolution really mirrors or maybe parasitizes the advancements in scientific understanding. The earliest claims, like Bessler's wheel, were largely focused on purely mechanical perpetual motion, visible gears, levers, weights, things you could supposedly see and understand even if they didn't work.
But then, as we understood more about invisible forces.
Right. As scientific knowledge progressed, especially with the understanding of electromagnetism in the 19th century, the claims adapted. They shifted to incorporate these invisible forces. That's where figures like Keeley come in with his etheric technology.
Tapping into this supposed universal energy field.
Exactly. Based on the now discredited 19th century concept of an all-pervading luminiferous ether. The claims became more sophisticated, harder to immediately disprove just by looking. And more recently, as quantum mechanics and cosmology have pushed the frontiers.
The claims have followed into the quantum realm.
Precisely. The claims have moved into quantum concepts and even cosmic scales. That's where you see the appropriation of terms like zero-point energy.
Which, as we discussed, is a real physical concept, but gets completely misinterpreted.
Profoundly misinterpreted. It's taken from its theoretical context in quantum field theory and presented in popular discourse as this readily available, easily harnessable energy source, despite physicists consistently stating how unlikely that is for practical energy generation, given the nature of quantum fluctuations and the laws governing energy extraction.
And even things like dark energy get pulled into this.
Sometimes, yes. Discussions around dark energy, the mysterious force hypothesized to be driving the accelerated expansion of the universe, can get conflated with these ideas of tapping into some vast, unknown ambient energy source. Proponents often seize on the unknowns at the frontiers of physics as proof that the established laws might be wrong or incomplete, thus making their claims possible.
Like the recent findings suggesting dark energy might not be constant.
Exactly. New data, like from the Dark Energy Spectroscopic Instrument, DESI, suggesting dark energy's influence might evolve over time. That highlights the dynamic nature of scientific inquiry. There's still huge mysteries. But for some, these open questions aren't seen as exciting areas for further scientific exploration, but rather as loopholes that somehow validate claims of easily accessible free energy, even though the connection isn't scientifically supported.
Let's go back to cold fusion again, but look at it slightly differently. Not just as a scientific mistake, but maybe as a case study in how science does scrutinize new ideas and the kind of resistance truly paradigm-shifting concepts can face, even if cold fusion itself didn't pan out.
That's a valid way to look at it. The cold fusion saga absolutely serves as a textbook example of the rigorous, sometimes messy, process of scientific validation. Pons and Fleischmann's claims were initially met with excitement, but that was immediately followed by intense, critical scrutiny from the global scientific community. That scrutiny is a necessary part of the process.
And the failure to replicate was key.
It was critical. The inability of numerous reputable independent labs, often with better equipment and controls, to consistently replicate the excess heat, and crucially, the absence of those expected nuclear byproducts. That's what led to its widespread rejection by the mainstream. It wasn't necessarily a conspiracy. It was a collective scientific failure to validate the original claims.
But the suppression narrative still persists among believers. They point to things like funding denials or challenges to publications as proof of a cover-up.
They do. And they might cite instances where, say, a researcher had difficulty getting funding for follow-up work, or faced skepticism when trying to publish positive results in niche journals. They interpret that resistance not as a consequence of the initial failure to provide robust, reproducible evidence, but as active suppression by a fearful establishment.
You mentioned the DOE maintaining its negative stance for years, which proponents used as evidence of closed-mindedness.
Right. The fact that the DOE, for instance, kept its critical 1989 assessment on its website for a long time was cited by some as proof of an unwillingness to consider newer, perhaps more refined research efforts that were still ongoing in smaller circles.
So it highlights this tension, doesn't it? Science needs to be open to revising theories.
Absolutely. Like how Einstein's general relativity explained Mercury's weird orbit when Newtonian mechanics couldn't, forcing a huge paradigm shift. Science must be willing to change based on new, solid evidence. But there are also these incredibly well-established fundamental laws of physics, like thermodynamics, that have been built up over centuries of rigorous testing and observation. Overturning those foundational laws requires truly extraordinary, profound, widespread, and unequivocally contradictory evidence. It requires much more than isolated, unreplicated, or ambiguous experimental results.
So the scientific process demands that high bar for revolutionary claims.
Exactly. The mainstream rejection of cold fusion reflected the consensus that the evidence presented simply didn't meet that necessarily high bar for overturning fundamental physics. It wasn't necessarily a closed mind, but rather an adherence to the rigorous standards of scientific proof needed for such a radical claim.
This leads us neatly into the perceived role of government and information control in these theories. The idea of suppression often links up with broader anxieties about government secrecy, right?
It definitely does. The forbidden energy hypothesis frequently connects with these wider narratives about government secrecy and the potential for controlling access to transformative technologies. And proponents often point to historical precedents where governments have undeniably classified sensitive information.
Like with nuclear technology.
Precisely. The Atomic Energy Act of 1954, for example, established the principle that research related to nuclear weapons and sometimes nuclear energy is born classified,
Right.
meaning it's restricted right from the moment of discovery due to national security concerns.
And export controls, too.
Yes, things like the Export Administration Act of 1979 allow the U.S. government to restrict the export of technologies deemed sensitive to national security. So these legal frameworks demonstrate that governments do possess and have used the power to control certain types of scientific and technological information.
Well, while governments clearly classify military-funded research, the argument often becomes about whether they have the right to classify or suppress something discovered privately.
That's a key point of contention for many believers. They argue that if an independent inventor, or maybe a private company, were to genuinely discover a revolutionary energy source like this, the government would have no legitimate right to seize that knowledge or suppress it, especially if it could benefit all of humanity. They see potential classification as an illegitimate overreach in such a case.
And the idea of forbidden science also pops up in discussions about, say, secret government research programs, things like UFO investigations.
Right. That adds another layer. You hear about programs, sometimes confirmed, sometimes rumored, like the Bigelow Aerospace Advanced Space Studies, BASAS program, which reportedly received government funding to investigate anomalous phenomena, including UFOs. And part of the speculation around such programs often includes the possibility that they might have stumbled upon or are trying to reverse engineer things like new propulsion technology or free energy from the quantum vacuum.
Even if those programs are highly debated and secretive.
Exactly. The findings, or even the true objectives of such programs, are often unclear or classified. But their mere existence can lend a degree of superficial plausibility to the idea of hidden advanced technologies for people who are already inclined to believe in government cover-ups. It helps fuel that forbidden energy narrative by suggesting the government is looking into unconventional areas, possibly in secret.
Okay, let's try and bring all this back to the present day. What's the actual practical relevance of these forbidden energy theories when we look at the real-world energy landscape and the genuine challenges we face right now?
Well, in the real world, electricity isn't just a luxury. It's absolutely fundamental to modern civilization. It powers everything, our homes, hospitals, industries, communications networks. But as we've touched on, its generation still heavily relies on fossil fuels, coal, oil, natural gas.
Which have advantages, like energy density.
Yes, they offer high energy density, meaning you can store a lot of energy in a relatively small volume or mass, and they're convenient to transport and use on demand. But the downsides are huge. They're finite resources, and burning them is the primary driver of climate change through greenhouse gas emissions.
And the alternatives: solar, wind, biomass.
They're becoming increasingly important and more affordable. They offer a much cleaner path, but they also face those real practical challenges we mentioned earlier.
Intermittency, land use, storage.
Right. Solar and wind are intermittent. They don't generate power 24/7. That necessitates large-scale energy storage, like batteries, which adds cost and complexity. Both often require significant land area for large farms or turbine arrays. And integrating these variable sources smoothly into our existing electrical grids is a major ongoing engineering and political challenge globally.
And the overall transition to a low-carbon energy system, it's proving incredibly difficult, isn't it? Technologically and politically.
It's a monumental task, especially for sectors that need very high energy density or high heat. Think about long-haul transport commercial airplanes, large container ships, or heavy industrial processes like making steel and cement. Transitioning those away from fossil fuels is incredibly complex and expensive right now. There aren't always easy, direct substitutes available at scale.
And this is where the appeal of a magical free energy solution comes roaring back in.
Precisely. It offers what appears to be this simple, elegant, immediate fix for these deeply entrenched, incredibly multifaceted global problems. It seems to bypass all the hard work, the technological hurdles, the economic shifts, the political battles involved in a real energy transition. That's why the idea remains so seductive for some, despite the lack of scientific backing.
So it's really important then to clearly distinguish these kinds of forbidden energy claims from actual viable technologies that might operate off-grid, but still rely on known conventional energy sources. People sometimes confuse those, don't they?
Absolutely crucial distinction to make. We need to separate the claims of energy from nothing, or overunity from real-world technologies that function without plugging into the electrical grid, but do so by harnessing other readily available energy sources in ways that fully conform to the laws of physics.
Like what kind of examples?
Well, classic examples include things like a solar-powered calculator. It runs without grid power, but it's converting sunlight, a known energy source, directly into electricity using photovoltaic cells. Or a traditional mechanical watch, which runs on the stirred potential energy in a wound spring. Or even a bicycle-powered generator, converting human kinetic energy into electricity.
So they use energy, just not grid energy.
Exactly. They're ingenious devices, often very efficient, but they're not free energy in the sense of defying physics. Even newer technologies, like blockchains, while they represent a fascinating innovation in decentralized ledgers, they currently rely heavily on substantial electricity consumption to power the computer networks and internet infrastructure they run on. They don't generate energy themselves.
Okay, so given all this, what is the legitimate path forward for energy innovation? How does real progress actually happen in this vital field?
Well, progress in energy science and technology, like in most scientific fields, is rarely a single eureka moment. It's usually more like fumbling through uncertainties and smashing into dead ends, as one writer put it. It requires immense persistence, rigorous experimentation, lots of trial and error, and importantly, a willingness for scientists to be willing to change their minds about even their closest held foundational theories, but only when genuinely new, robust, and reproducible evidence demands it.
So openness has to be balanced with rigorous critical thinking.
Absolutely. Especially when you encounter claims that appear to violate fundamental, well-established laws of physics like thermodynamics. The burden of proof for such extraordinary claims has to be extraordinarily high.
So while there are legitimate new energy technologies being researched and commercialized, maybe efforts to use hydrogen more effectively, or advancements in fusion research, better solar cells, improved battery storage?
Right. Things like continued efforts to improve catalysts for hydrogen production or use, ongoing research into controlled nuclear fusion, which is incredibly difficult but theoretically possible, developing more efficient photovoltaic materials, creating safer and denser batteries.
These are all fundamentally different from the overunity or perpetual motion claims we've been discussing.
Fundamentally different, yes, because all those legitimate research efforts operate within the known laws of physics. The ongoing scientific pursuit of real new energy solutions focuses on improving efficiency, developing advanced storage, exploring complex but physically plausible phenomena like fusion. These efforts are rigorously grounded in a deep understanding of and respect for the limitations imposed by physics.
The goal is innovation within the boundaries, not claiming to break them without proof.
Exactly. It's about pushing the boundaries of what's possible within the laws of nature, not pretending those laws don't exist. Understanding that distinction is absolutely key to navigating this complex landscape, separating genuine scientific progress from the persistent allure of unsubstantiated claims that promise the impossible.
Well, we have certainly taken a deep dive today into this persistent hypothesis, the idea that governments have intentionally concealed evidence of forbidden energy theories. We've tried to systematically examine its historical roots, the huge economic and political stakes involved, the profound scientific challenges it faces, and its undeniable cultural impact.
Yeah, and understanding these really complex narratives, it requires, I think, careful consideration of the scientific principles involved, a really critical look at the historical events people cite, and a discerning analysis of the motivations, both conscious and unconscious, behind the various claims and counterclaims.
It's about trying to figure out what's theoretically possible based on our current understanding of the universe, what's practically feasible with the technology we actually have,
Right.
and what ultimately remains in the realm of unsubstantiated speculation, belief, or even deliberate deception.
It's not always easy to draw those lines.
No, definitely not. As we look ahead and we think about the truly immense and urgent energy challenges our world is facing, perhaps the most profound question isn't really whether free energy is hiding somewhere, suppressed.
Maybe the better question is,
Maybe it's what truly extraordinary new discoveries and breakthroughs could emerge if all that human ingenuity, all that collective scientific effort, if it could be fully focused on genuinely innovative solutions within the known, yet still unfolding, laws of the universe, instead of being diverted by, magical thinking or deceptive promises.
and adding to that, how might our understanding of those fundamental laws themselves continue to evolve? How can we push the boundaries of what we currently believe is possible, not by resorting to the fantastical, but through that rigorous inquiry, that relentless evidence-based pursuit of truth? That's where the real breakthroughs are likely to come from.
A fascinating thought to end on. Thanks for listening to Conspiracist.